Sarek National Park. Sarek National Park, Swedish, Sareks National Park, is a national park in Jokkmokk Municipality, Lapland in northern Sweden. Established in 1909, the park is the oldest national park in Europe. It is adjacent to two other national parks, namely Stora Sjöfallet and Padjelanta. The shape of Sarek National Park is roughly circular with an average diameter of about 50 km 31.7 mi. The most noted features of the national park are 6 of Sweden's 13 peaks over 2,000 and 6,600 ft located within the park's boundaries. Among these is the second highest mountain in Sweden, Sarektjåkkå, whilst the massif Áhkká is located just outside the park. The park has about 200 peaks over 1,800 and 5,900 ft, 82 of which have names. Sarek is also the name of a geographical area which the national park is part of. The Sarek Mountain District includes a total of 8 peaks over 2,000 and 6,600 ft. Due to the long trek, the mountains in the district are seldom climbed. There are approximately 100 glaciers in Sarek National Park. Sarek is a popular area for hikers and mountaineers. Beginners in these disciplines are advised to accompany a guide since there are no marked trails or accommodations and only 2 bridges aside from those in the vicinity of its borders. The area is among those that receives the heaviest rainfall in Sweden, making hiking dependent on weather conditions. It is also intersected by turbulent streams that are hazardous to cross without proper training. The delta of the Roper River is considered one of Europe's most noted views, and the summit of Mount Skirf offers an overlook of that ice-covered, glacial, trough valley. The Part Scientific Station in Sarek, also known as the Part Observatory, was built in the early 1900s by Swedish mineralogist and geographer Axel Hamburg. All the building material for the huts had to be carried to the site by porters. Names of locations. In Sarek National Park, as in the most of Sápmi, a large number of the locations have names originating from the Sami languages. These languages have several variations and their written forms have changed over time, which explains why some place names do not always correspond with each other in different sources. The most common Sami names for locations or features in the park are Tijakka or Tijakko Mountain, Vag Valley, Jakka or Jakko Stream, Lako Plateau, and Atno River. An example of this is Rapatno, meaning Roper River. These names are also the official Swedish names of the locations. Geography. Location and borders. Sarek National Park is situated in the Jokkmokk Municipality, Norrbotten County, Sweden, north of the Arctic Circle, 50 km 31.7 mi from the Norwegian border. The area of the park is 1977 km to 763 sq mi, and it is adjacent to the national parks Padjelanta in the west and Stora Sjöfallet in the north. The parks have a combined area of approximately 5,500 km to 2,100 sq mi. There are also a number of nature reserves nearby. Topography. Sarek National Park is the most mountainous region in Sweden, and it is the part of the country that mostly resembles an alpine countryside. Within the park are 19 summits higher than 1,900 and 6,200 ft, the most noted being the second highest summit in Sweden after the Kebnekaise, the Sarektjåkkå, with a height of 2,089 and 6,854 ft. The lowest altitude in the park is found in the southwest, near Lake Rittikjara, at 477 and 1,565 ft. The park is made up of 3 types of landscape, sometimes difficult to differentiate between: large valleys, massive mountains, and high plateau. The largest valley of the park, which is also the most noted, is the Rapa Valley. This valley occupies 40 km to 15 sq mi of the park, including several branches, the most important of which are the Sarvisvag, which climbs as far as Padjelanta, the Keuopervag with an area of nearly 20 km to 7 SQ mi, and the Uotsvag, surrounded by numerous glaciers, including those of Mount Sarektjåkkå. Among the other notable valleys, outside the Rapidalan network, are the Kukkasvag, that makes up the northeastern border of the park, and the Enjatsisvag near the southern border. The largest plateau is the Áhkká, east of the park massif, with an altitude starting at 660–850 m 2170–2790 ft. West of Part, the Áhkká Plateau covers an area of 45 km to 17 SQ mi and has an even higher altitude at 1200–1400 m 3900–4600 ft. Interspersed between the valleys and the plateau are massive mountains, often with several summits. The main ones are Sarektjåkkå, highest point, Stortoppen, 2089 m 6854 ft. Padjelanta, 2005 m 6578 ft. Pielorup, Katakaskatjåkkå, 1978 m 6490 ft. Áhkká, 1974 m 6476 ft. Áhkká, 1914 m 6280 ft. Skarki, 1842 m 6043 ft. Uots, 1804 m 5919 ft. Climate. Hydrography. The park's main river is the Rapa River Rapatno. It originates from the glaciers of Sarektjåkkå and runs down the Rapa Valley as far as Lake Latora, and continues outside the park, where it joins with the lesser Lule River, which becomes a tributary of the Lule River at its confluence. This river is fed by 30 glaciers, contributing to a significant flow. The specific flow, the ratio between the average flow and the drainage basin from these waters, is the most significant in Sweden. The flow fluctuates strongly with the seasons, having an average of 100 m3 S1 in July and about 4 m3 S1 in winter, resulting in an average annual flow of approximately 30 m3 S1. The river also transports a significant quantity of sediment. In summer, it can carry up to 5,000–10,000 metric tons, 11,022 million lb of sediment daily. In winter, it only carries a few tons every day, resulting in an annual total of 180,000 metric tons, 400 million lb. The sediment gives the river a gray-green color and forms large deltas. The main delta is formed at the confluence of the Rapatno with its principal tributary, the river Sarektjåkkå. Just before the confluence, the river braids for nearly 10 km 6.2 mi, forming a zone called Rapaslet. The most noted of the deltas and an emblem of the park is the Latora Delta Latoreddeltat, which the river forms as it connects with Lake Latora. The other significant rivers correspond to the principal valleys listed above. Most of them make up the drainage basin of Lesser Lule River. The rivers in the north part of the park flow into Lake Áhkká in the Stora Sjöfallet National Park, forming part of the hydrographic network of Lule Älv. The park also contains several lakes. The largest are the Áhkká, altitude 751 m or 2464 ft, on the border between the Sarek and the Padjelanta Park, and the Sarektjåkkå, altitude 820 m or 2690 ft, near the Stora Sjöfallet National Park. The landscapes of Rapa River. Geology. Formation. The Sarek National Park lies within the Scandinavian Mountains, a mountain chain whose origin is still a matter of debate. The rocks of the Scandinavian Mountains were put in place by the Caledonian orogeny, forming a belt of deformed and displaced rocks now known as the Scandinavian Caledonides. Caledonian rocks overlie rocks of the much older Speckekärlian and Spekke-Norwegian provinces. The Caledonian rocks actually form large naps Swedish scholar that have been thrusted over the older rocks. Much of the Caledonian rocks have been eroded since they were put in place, meaning that they were once thicker and more contiguous. It is also implied from the erosion that the naps of Caledonian rock reached once further east than they do today. The erosion has left remaining massifs of Caledonian rocks and windows of Precambrian rock. The Caledonian orogeny resulted from the collision of the Laurentia and Baltica plates 450 to 250 million years ago, with the disappearance of the Iapetus Ocean by subduction. This happened just before the formation of the chain and was caused by the appearance of a rift, which finally led to the creation of the Atlantic Ocean. The chain, once split open, continued to erode until it formed a peneplain. Starting about 60 million years ago, both the Scandinavian and the North American sections suffered a tectonic uplift. It is unclear what causes this, and several hypotheses have been presented. One of the theories is the influence of the Iceland hotspot, which could have raised the crust. Another hypothesis is the isostasy related to glaciations caused the uplift. In any of those cases, the uplift allowed the ancient mountain chain to rise several thousand meters. The area of the national park, and the eastern Sarek Mountains in particular, was the last of part of Fennoscandia to be deglaciated. The last remnants of the Fennoscandian ice sheet melted there slightly after 9,700 years BP. Erosion. The mountain chain was renewed, and after that it was subjected to a new period of glacial erosion. In the beginning of the Quaternary period, 15 million years ago, a significant glacial advance occurred. The glaciers began to grow and move into the valleys, where they gradually merged to form an ice sheet that covered the entire region. Several further glaciations followed, forming the current landscape, with glacial valleys, cirques, nunataks, etc. The degree to which the chain was affected by the erosion depended mainly on the structure of the terrain, which explains the diversity in the topography of the area. The topography of Sarek, similar to that of Kebnekaise, is divided into sharply defined zones, particularly in respect to the two neighboring national parks. This is mainly due to the existence of diabase and diorite dikes, which are more resistant to erosion. The park is intersected by a tangle of dikes created 608 million years ago, an era that probably corresponds with the first appearance of the rift during the formation of the Iapetus Ocean. These dikes represent intrusions into the Sarektjåkkå nap. Glaciers. The park has over 100 glaciers, making it one of the most glacier-rich areas in Sweden. The glaciers are relatively small, the largest being Partajäkna in part at 11 km 2 sq. However, some of the others are relatively large for Sweden, since the largest Swedish glacier, Stora in Sulitama south of Padjelanta, measures 13 km 0 sq. The evolution of the glaciers, particularly that of the Mikka 8 km 1 sq. have been studied since the end of the 19th century, especially by mineralogist and geographer Axel Hamburg. The other glaciers in the park have an evolution similar to that of the Mikka. 1883 to 1895 they were mostly receding. Later they stabilized or grew, which was interpreted as being caused by the increase in winter precipitation related to global warming. The effect of the raised summer temperatures has been taken into account when assessing the data. The receding of the glaciers has resumed at a particularly rapid pace during the first years of the 21st century. Wildlife. According to its WWF classification, Sarek National Park is situated in the Scandinavian montane birch, forest and grasslands ecoregion, with a minor section in the Scandinavian and Russian taiga. With regards to the flora, and fauna, Sarek does not have a wide variety of species. This is mainly explained by the fact that most of the park, except the south and southeast part, is above the growth limit of conifers, which is at an altitude of about 500 and 1600 ft in this region. Adding to this, unlike most of the region, Sarek National Park has few vast lakes or swamps. A total of approximately 380 species of vascular plants have been found in the park, as well as 182 species of vertebrates, 24 mammals, 142 birds, 2 reptiles, 2 amphibians, and 12 fish. Many of these species are on the Swedish Red List of endangered species, notably the large carnivores. The vegetation follows a fairly strict altitudinal zonation as a result of the climate, and implying a similar zonation of fauna, although this is often less strict. Montane zone. The montane zones are relatively rare in the park, as its upper limit is about 500 and 1600 ft below most altitudes in these northern latitudes. The flora of this zone is constituted by old-growth forests of conifers, with mainly Scots pines, and including Norway spruces. The pines can become very tall, particularly those around Lake Ritak in the south part of the park. The undergrowth is mostly covered with mosses and lichens, in particular reindeer lichen, and also with Vaccinium myotilis and Petrum nigrum and cowberry. The Sarek forests are a preferred habitat for numerous species of animals. Among the large carnivores, the brown bear is particularly frequent in the park and in the neighboring Stora Sjöfallet. The bear fairly often also ventures into the subalpine region. The Eurasian lynx, classed as an endangered species in Sweden, is also found around the lakes of Ritak and Laitara, and is also found in the subalpine forests of Rapa Valley. The red fox is relatively frequent and is gradually extending its territory into the higher zones, where it competes with the Arctic fox. Some small mammals that are frequent in the park are the European pine marten, the least weasel, and the stoat. The ermine is also found in the higher regions. The herbivores include a very large number of moose, as the forests and humid zones provide them with much food. They often grow to an impressive size in the park, with enormous antlers. The birds in Sarek include a number of owls, such as the Ural owl, and woodpeckers, particularly the Eurasian three-toed woodpecker. The gray-headed chickadee is also very common, as are the fieldfare, the song thrush, and the redwing. Reptiles and amphibians, such as the viviparous lizard, the common frog, and the common European viper, are mostly found in the forests. The vipers of the Ritak region frequently reach remarkable sizes. Subalpine zone. The subalpine zone mostly consists of old-growth birch forests. These forests are exceptional in terms of density and richness, making it possible for significant quantities of sediment material to be carried from the mountainside by the runoff and deposited in the watercourses. This kind of transfer is particularly noted in the Rapa Valley. In general, the transition between the conifer forests and the ones consisting of birch is more or less gradual, with the number of birches present in the coniferous forests increasing along with the altitude until the conifers have completely disappeared. The size of the trees also diminishes with increasing altitude. The upper altitude limit for the forests, which is also the tree line, varies greatly throughout the park, from 600 m 2000 ft in the Tjolta Valley to over 800 m 2600 ft in the Rapa Valley. The birch forests also contain other species of trees. The number of rowan, gray alder, trembling poplar, hackberry is relatively high. The alpine blue sow thistle is very widespread in this zone and is the food the bears prefer. Garden angelica also grows in the forests, reaching a height of 2 to 3 m 6 to 9, 8 ft. Many other plants in this zone can also attain exceptional size. The division between the birch and coniferous forests is relatively blurred. Some small mammals are found more frequently here than in the coniferous forests, particularly several rodents such as the common shrew and the field vole. This is also the reindeer's habitat. The Sami people living within the borders of the park have domesticated the reindeer that stay in this zone during spring and move up to the alpine zone in summer. Brown bears are common in the valleys of Padjelanta and Rapidalen. However, it is the quantity and variety of birds that enriches this zone. The willow warbler, the common redpoll, the brambling, the yellow wagtail, the northern wheatear, and the bluethroat are characteristic of the birch forests. The willow ptarmigan is also more common in this area. The raptors present in the zone are the merlin and the rough-legged buzzard, which often nests on the cliffs. The geofalcon and the golden eagle usually prefer lower altitudes, are nevertheless also found in the park. Alpine zone. The alpine zone is divided into several narrower zones. The first subzone is mostly characterized by heathland, with many alder shrubs, mosses and lichens, and frequently dense mats of crowberries. Different types of heaths can be distinguished. One type is mostly composed of a mix of alpine clubmoss and alpine bearberry. Cushion pink and Lapland lousewort bring autumn color to the heaths, which are otherwise fairly monochrome. In the chalky soils of this subzone, the vegetation is very rich and forms prairies with mountain avens as the most characteristic species. Purple saxifrage, velvet bells, pine pussytoes, and alpine veronica are also present. With increasing altitude, the dwarf willow and lichens become more prominent, forming a second zone. Gradually, the plants become more scarce, and above 1500 m 4900 ft, there are only 18 types of plants present. There are 3 rare mammals who live in this zone. The wolverine inhabits a vast territory, roaming as far as the coniferous forests in winter, but the alpine zone is their main territory. They mostly eat carrion, but they do also hunt living animals such as small rodents, birds, and insects. The wolverine is labeled as an endangered species in Sweden with an estimate of 360 individuals in the country in 2000. The Arctic fox is a critically endangered species in Sweden, with only 50 individuals in the whole country. They dig extensive networks of tunnels in areas above the tree line, with several families inhabiting the same set. The park is one of the last sanctuaries for the gray wolf, a species also critically endangered in Sweden. In 1974–1975, the park was home to the only remaining wild wolf living in Sweden. Although the wolf population is now growing, they have not yet achieved a stable number in the park. In addition to these 3 mammals, Norway lemmings are also found in the park. The number of lemmings varies extremely, with massive spikes in the population during some years, immediately followed by a very rapid decline. This phenomenon is not completely understood. It appears that favorable weather, and therefore a surplus of food, results in sudden population growths, but the reason for the decline is less obvious, although it is certain that contagious diseases play some role. These cycles are also reflected in the populations of animals who prey on the lemmings. Many birds living at this altitude are associated with the humid zones. However, the alpine zone has its own characteristic species, such as the rock ptarmigan, the snowy owl, the horned lark, the meadow pipit, the snow bunting, and the Lapland longspur. Humid zone. Although the park does not have the vast marshes and lakes characteristic of the rest of the region, water is nevertheless present everywhere. The humid zones are rich with a great diversity of flora and fauna. The stratification of vegetation is just as valid in the humid zones. In the montane region, The humid soils are covered with flowers such as the northern Labrador tea cottonsedge, the Goldilocks buttercup. In the subalpine zone, the humid prairies mainly have mats of globe flower, kingcup, and two-flower violet. In the alpine region, there are many subalpine plants as well as the pedicularis Sceptrum carolinum, and the vegetation decreases as the altitude increases. The humid zones of the park are well known for their rich diversity of birds. The common crane, the wood sandpiper, and the short-eared owl are found at the lower altitudes, while the Eurasian teal, the Eurasian widgeon, the greater scaup, the red-breasted merganser, the sedge warbler, and the common reed bunting are common in the late Aura Delta and around Sarektjåkkå Lake. At higher altitudes, Vardøjara Lake is rich with birds, mostly ducks, and also the European golden plover, characteristic of the alpine zone, and sometimes found in the humid zones. Sarektjåkkå Lake, on the border of Padjelanta, is interesting from an ornithological point of view. Other rare species are also present, such as the lesser white-fronted goose, the great snipe, the red-throated pipit, the long-tailed duck, and the bar-tailed godwit. The Sarektjåkkå Plateau is also considered to be interesting, with the most significant concentration of purple sandpipers in Sweden. Arctic chars, trouts, and common minnows are found in the park's lakes, rivers, and streams. Tourism. Sarek National Park is mainly a high alpine area with almost no accommodation for tourists. Hiking trails. The Kungsleden hiking trail passes through the eastern part of the park from Sarektjåkkå to Sarektjåkkå. There are no cabins within the park. The Sea and Sarektjåkkå cabins are just outside the park, and they are accessible from both Sarektjåkkå and Sarektjåkkå. The Padjelanta Trail Padjelantaelden, running from Sarektjåkkå to Áhkká, skirts the park along its western rim at Sarektjåkkå, where the Sarektjåkkå cabin is just on the border of the park. Hazards. Due to the lack of shelters combined with rapidly shifting weather and rough terrain, it is recommended that hikers are well prepared and experienced before setting out on the trails of the park. Fording streams. There are few bridges in the park, and crossing streams Sami, Jokk, and rivers Sami, Áhkká can be dangerous for ill-equipped or inexperienced hikers. Warm weather increases the melting of the glaciers, causing water levels to rise, therefore wading is often easier and safer early in the morning. The only ford across the Rapper River south of the Smalamute is at Tilmeskate. The ford is long and can only be used when water levels are low. Inexperienced hikers are recommended not to cross without a guide. The glacier Jokkmokk from Partajekna, Sarektjåkkå, has no fords. There is a bridge at the southernmost part of the stream 67-925, 9 and 17-5120. 9e. Hikers can also follow the streams up to the glacier and cross there, although this requires knowledge about glacier crossing. Sarek in the winter. The lack of marked trails and accommodations makes it very difficult for visitors to hike in the park in winter, unless they are experienced and properly equipped. The steep slopes of the valleys also contributes to the risk for avalanches. Places of interest. Áhkká. Áhkká is an old farm settlement on the Kungsleden Trail, approximately 1.3 km 0. mi outside the boundaries of the park. Alcaver. In 1788 a chapel was built at Alcaver 67-2032. 7 and 17-1255. 3e for the Sami that were herding reindeer in the area during summer. The walls of the building were dry set from local stone and the roof was made of timber. Originally, service was held every summer on June 25. It took the minister from Sarektjåkkå 3 days to reach the chapel and 3 days to get back. It was abandoned in the mid-19th century and renovated in 1961, and is still in use. As of 2015, it belongs to the Jokkmokk parish of the Church of Sweden, and church service is held throughout July. The Smälamoot. Just above the canyon, formed by Smälajack as it descends toward Rapatno, there is a cabin for the National Park Service 67-2238 and 17-3842E. There is also a bridge over the Smälajack Canyon, which allows hikers to cross the stream safely. The bridge is removed every winter and put back in the spring after the spring flood. The cabin is not open to hikers, but there is an emergency shelter, as well as an emergency telephone and an outhouse there. The presence of the bridge and the fact that 3 of the major valleys in the park, Rautasväg, Rapa Valley, and Kuperväg, converge there, has resulted in the name Smälamoot for the location, which has become a meeting place for hikers in the park. It is also a preferred location to start a climb to the top of the Sarektjåkkå 2089 m 6854 ft via the Áhkká glacier. Pastavag. Pastavag, in Lul Sami orthography called Bastavag, is a narrow valley, forming a pass running from Pilaval to Bilavalda towards the east, ending north of Rinum on the shores of Lake Sitajara Javar. The trekking distance from Pilavalta to Rinum is about 18 km 11 mi. As there is a boat connection between Rinum and the Sitajara cabins on the Kungsleden, Pastavag is a preferred route to and from central Sarek. The difference in altitude between the eastern entrance of the valley and the highest level of the pass is about 750 m 2460 ft. Because of the steep climb, multiple fords, and the high alpine terrain, it usually takes at least a full day for hikers to traverse the pass. History. The Sami people. The region's first inhabitants arrived with the retreat of the inland seas 8,000 years ago. They were nomads who lived in northern Scandinavia and probably ancestors of the Samis. Initially, they were hunter-gatherers living off reindeer. For those people, the mountains often had religious connotations, and several were deity places of worship. Offerings, such as antlers from reindeer, were often made in those places. One of the most significant deity was situated at the foot of Mount Skirf 1179 m 3868 ft high, at the entrance to the Rapa Valley. Samis from the entire region gathered in this place for ceremonies. Mount Áhkká itself was believed to be the home of demons, and legend tells of an illegitimate child's ghost inside it. Despite their hunter-gatherer way of life, the Samis kept some domesticated reindeer. They were milked and used for transport as well as other things. Towards the end of the 17th century, the number of domesticated reindeer increased, and the Samis began to harmonize their traveling with the reindeer's search for pasture. Eventually, hunting the reindeer gave way to farming them. The Samis in the mountains gradually developed a system of transhumance movement between fixed summer and winter pastures. They spent the winters on the park's plains and moved up into the mountains in summer, mainly to Padjelanta. Sarek was mostly used as a corridor for travels, although certain prairies, Skarja and Pilavalta in particular, were used for pasture. For shelter during their long journeys, which could last for several weeks, the inhabitants built huts, kata, selected places in the park. Little by little, they left the reindeer to graze as they pleased, and stopped moving with the herds in the old way. Sarek and the Swedes. When the Swedish government took control over the Sami territory, the Sami had to pay the same taxes as other Swedes. In the 17th century, the Sami were evangelized by the Swedes, who often built churches and markets in locations where the Sami traditionally stayed during winter. The Swedes considered the mountains to be frightening and dangerous, so they did not explore them. When the first ore deposits were discovered in the region, the Swedes attempted to persuade the Sami to prospect for other ores in the mountains, in particular silver. But in general, the Sami did not dare to reveal such information to the Swedes because they did not want to incur the disapproval of their fellow Sami. An ore discovery was likely to result in the Sami being forced into near slavery, working the mines and transporting the minerals. The Áhkká deposit was an exception. Its existence was revealed to the Swedes by an extremely poor Sami, who became held in disdain by his tribe due to this. The exploitation of the mine began in 1672, but it never rendered any profit and was abandoned in 1702. A few attempts to reopen the mine has been made, but they have not been successful. The ruins of 2 buildings and a little chapel are visible nearby the site. The first Swede to scientifically explore the mountains was Carl von Linné in his expedition to Lapland in 1732. Later, in 1870, Gustav Wilhelm Bucht mapped the region. Shortly after, in 1881, the Frenchman Charles Rabot became the first man to reach the summit of Sarektjåkkå. The 1890s marked the start of systematic scientific expeditions. Most noted is the work of Axel Hamburg. Hamburg began his study of the region in 1895. He studied the park, chiefly the glaciers, until his death in 1931. He created a high-quality map and constructed 5 cabins in the park, known as the Park Station, where he conducted his studies of Sarek. Axel Hamburg's work was particularly significant for widespread public recognition of the park. Protection. The 1872 creation of the world's first national park in Yellowstone started a universal momentum for the protection of nature. In Sweden, the polar explorer Adolf Erik Nordenskjöld became the first to propose using the new concept to protect areas of the Swedish landscape. Axel Hamburg, Nordenskjöld, and other scientists organized a plea for establishing Sweden's first national parks, Sarek in particular. They convinced the Swedish botanist and member of the Riksdag Carl Starback from Uppsala University to raise the question in the Riksdag. The proposition was accepted in May 1909, and the first 9 national parks were established. These were also the first in Europe. Among them were Sarek and its neighbor, the Stora Sjöfallet. The reason given for establishing the park was, as stated in official protocols, to preserve a high mountain landscape in its natural state. In the middle of the 20th century, with developments in hydroelectricity in Sweden, dams were frequently built across the northern rivers of Sweden. These barrages were also constructed in the national parks. The Stora Sjöfallet National Park lost nearly a third of its land area with the creation of a dam in 1919. In 1961, an accord called the Sarek Peace Freden I Sarek was forged, preventing hydroelectric developments in Sarek as well as in certain rivers, designated national rivers. This also led to the establishing of Padjelanta National Park. In 1982, the International Union for Conservation of Nature Áhkká mentioned a vast zone including Sarek National Park in its tentative list of natural sites to be classified as World Heritage Sites by UNESCO. Sweden proposed that part of this zone, the Sarektjåkkå Nature Reserve. In 1996, Sarek Park was classed as a World Heritage Site including the adjoining areas of Padjelanta, Stora Sjöfallet, Sarektjåkkå and Stubba Nature Reserves, Munis National Park and 3 adjacent areas, making a total of 9,400 km to 3,600 sq mi. The whole area was added to the World Heritage as a mixed site of cultural and natural value called the Laponian area. Park also became part of the Natura 2000 network. Being on the World Heritage list allowed the park to have its first protection plan. The plan was written with thorough consultation of the Sami, who had not been consulted when the park was established. The WWF paid for this process. The 2007 Environmental Protection Agency plan for the national parks includes a plan to expand Sarek to incorporate the area of the Laitara Delta and the Tijuoltadalen Valley to the south part of the park. This extension had already been proposed in the 1989 plan, but the situation changed with the World Heritage designation as the proposed extension would make up a sizable part of the Laponian region. History of tourism. Sarek National Park is viewed by many Swedes as one of the most beautiful landscapes of their country. The enthusiasm for it was started by Axel Hamburg's book on the park. The Swedish Tourist Association STF was created in 1885. In 1886, they mentioned Sarek as a potential tourist site for the first time. However, the number of tourists was not more than a few dozen. In 1900, the association studied the possibility of creating a long hiking trail crossing the Lapland mountains between Áhkká and Sarektjåkkå. The initial proposal was for a marked trail that passed through the park, a boat crossing of the Rapaslet, and a mountain hut beside the river. The project was abandoned, and the STF concentrated mostly on Kebnekaise and Seldom. The trail Kungsleden was built, but only coming close to the park in the southeast corner of it. In 1946, Dag Hammarskjöld popularized the expression Var sista stora vildmark, our last great wilderness. Dag Hammarskjöld advocated a growing tourism in the park that took care not to damage the environment. Edvin Nilsson's 1970 book on the park strengthened its reputation, increasing the number of tourists from 200 or 300 in the 1960s to 2,000 in 1971. This sudden success caused several problems, such as the temporary overcrowding on certain trails in the Rapa Valley, which were not designed to accommodate so many visitors. Management and regulation. The general case. As for the majority of the Swedish national parks, the management and administration of the park is divided between the Environmental Protection Agency of Sweden and the County Administrative Board. The Environmental Protection Agency is in charge of proposing new national parks in consultation with the county and municipality council. The establishing of each new park requires a decision from the Riksdag. After that, the land is bought by the government through the intermediary of the Environmental Protection Agency. The rest of the park's management is done by the county council. In Sarek's case, this is the Norrbotten County Council. The park rules are relatively strict to preserve the park in its near pristine condition. Fishing, hunting, picking flowers, and any other activity that could damage the wildlife are all forbidden, except for picking berries and edible mushrooms. Similarly, no motorized vehicles are allowed in the park. The Sami exception. There are several exceptions in the laws about management and regulation of the national parks regarding the Sami. In 1977, Sami people were recognized by Sweden as an indigenous people, a minority group, which implies that the people and their way of life are protected by law. This grants the Sami the right to farm reindeer in the park. The park is situated on territory belonging to the Sami communities of Sareks, Jokkmokk, and Tuorpans. The Sami who are members of these communities are also allowed to pasture their reindeer in the park. In carrying out these activities, the Sami have the right to use motorized vehicles such as snowmobiles or helicopters. These rights are sometimes conflicting with the protection of wildlife. An example of this is when carnivores attacked the Sami reindeer. Such an incident occurred in 2007 when an unregistered wolf, a protected and endangered species in Sweden, wandered into an area in Jokkmokk's 30 km 19 mi southeast of the Rapa Valley where reindeer were grazing. The wolf was captured, radio collared, and DNA tested. It was kept under surveillance and attempts were made to scare it away, but after it had killed several reindeer and disrupted the herd, a decision was made to shoot it. The decision and the killing were made collectively by the Norrbotten County Administrative Board, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Sami in accordance with the National Nuisance Wildlife Management Act. There is also an ongoing debate about the damages caused by snowmobiles and all-terrain vehicles in the parks. The snowmobiles have become increasingly popular and numerous, while global warming has made the terrain more vulnerable to the vehicles. Joyrides by visitors outside the marked trails have become a problem, especially for the Sami, since they claim that the disruptions made by snowmobiles may cause the pregnant female reindeer to drop their calves prematurely. In popular culture, the park was the main setting of the 2017 film The Ritual.